everyone and happy International Women's Day. We are honored to have Lakshmi Iyer, Managing Director of SI UK, a well-known education leader and advocate for women in the education sector. She is here to share about her education and study abroad journey, along with her insights and advice on how we can continue to support and empower women in our communities. Hi Lakshmi, good morning.
Good morning.
It is indeed very exciting to interview on Women's Day Eve. We have a woman leader from the education industry.
So it's indeed my pleasure to be interviewed by you, Sandhya. I mean, you are one of our most amazing women managers running a big operation out of Delhi. So, on this occasion, to be interviewed by another peer is indeed an honor. So, yeah.
We all are very inquisitive, actually, to know that what really inspired you to have a career in this education industry.
Actually, I did my first degree in psychology because my mother happens to be a psychologist. She holds a PhD in psychology. And then I followed that with a master's in business administration. I did most of my education in Kerala. And after my MBA, I got to work for the newspaper industry. So I was posted in Bombay working for Indian Express newspapers. I was on a short medical break back home in Kerala and started reflecting on what it is that I wanted to do. I had by then completed 1 year with Indian Express, and my heart was sort of like telling me that I wanted to go back to academics. So the British Library in Trivandrum sort of became a favorite haunt to do some research. And that continued when I got back to Bombay, and I decided that I was going to apply to British universities to look for another master's. I didn't have the time to do a GMAT or a GRE because I was in a full-time job in corporate marketing with Indian Express. So I started researching on universities for a master's in international marketing, which sort of seemed like a natural kind of progression from a master's in business administration, or so I thought at that point in time. And I applied to a fair few universities on my own, with some background research done at the British Library, and then won a joint DFID scholarship to study masters in international marketing with University of Strathclyde. And I came back to India after completing that master's, and then went on to work for an education recruitment agency called Study Overseas. I didn't know an agency business even existed because I did most of my applications on my own when I decided to study in the UK. And I went into that job interview, to be honest, because I ticked all of the boxes that they wanted their candidates to have. Like, you should have got to your credit a British university scholarship, British government scholarship. Then you should have studied in the UK, of course. And a fair, you should have had at least 2 years of work experience, etc., which all, I sort of ticked. So I went for the interview and got hired as the assistant manager for their newly set up Mumbai office. And I went into a role not knowing what that business was really, but then I discovered that I had a natural flair for counseling students. I had been a student in the UK, and I sort of fell in love with the sector and never left it, right? So I stayed on in that job for 10 years, almost, and then went into education consulting world, helping international universities set up their operations in different parts of the world. So another side of the professional services side of the education business. So I've had the privilege, to be honest, of working across the board. What really helped me in my education consulting world was, of course, the foundation that was laid at Study Overseas as a student counselor. I love our sector, and I don't think I'm going to ever do anything else professionally because there's so much going on in the higher education space.
So Lakshmi, you mentioned that you yourself has been a student abroad. So, how did your experience of studying abroad shape your understanding of gender issues?
It's a very interesting question, Sandhya. I think gender issues exist all over the world. And what studying in the UK really opened my eyes to is that there are worlds where women can operate, not being under a male gaze, so to speak. Have grown up in a very sheltered, very conservative environment, and then worked obviously in two different states of India outside of my home state, which is Kerala, before becoming a student in the UK. Suddenly gave me a sense of freedom, right? The freedom to just be myself, do what I really like. I am a closet academic. I love studying. I know it really doesn't kind of, people will be like, why does she say this? But, I do love studying. So that 1 year as a master's student, I just spent all of my time, divided between the library and classes and just, being in my room, just studying and then going and hanging out with my friends very occasionally. I felt this acute sense of kind of responsibility because I was a scholarship student, and I didn't want anybody to think that they gave scholarship to a student who isn't really spending her time studying. So I thought that was my mission. Anyway, now I would have different advice to students anyways. But I think gender violence, pay gap, gender pay gap, all of these things exist. But when you go outside of your comfort zone and go and live in a new country, learn to work in a new environment, what that enables you is that you are empowered from the perspective of seeing different viewpoints, being exposed to actions that are being taken in other societies against some of these, and you can kind of then take it upon yourself to implement some of those things in your personal and professional lives as to how you would deal with those kinds of gender issues.
Okay, Lakshmi, studying as a student on full scholarship is indeed very rewarding. So, I want to know from you that what skills a student must possess in order to be successful in securing a scholarship.
So I went to the UK to study Masters in International Marketing at the University of Strathclyde on a shared DFID scholarship. So it was fully funded, and it is something that I consider as a huge privilege that I managed to have at that point in time. Obviously, academic uh, accomplishments are hugely important. But having said that, the scholarship committees usually look for students with a very holistic background. Interning is something that I would encourage students who are looking to get a scholarship to study anywhere in the world. If you have done a series of internships, that would definitely kind of give comfort to the scholarship panel that here is someone who has really gone out to kind of explore an office environment or an area of interest that they have, that they claim on paper that they do. So you have to always have evidence based actions to support your claims. I went into Strathclyde for my master's after work experience of 2.5 years. So when I went in front of the panel um, uh, in early 2000, by then I had 2 years of work experience in the newspaper industry, in marketing. So that obviously formed a good kind of foundation for what it was that I was trying to do as my second master's. And I was also quite, never ever lie about your interests to the panel, because the panel usually would comprise of individuals and experts drawn from various walks of life. And at the British Council on that given day, I clearly remember having panelists, obviously put forward by the university, but also from the British Council, who had interest in art and literature and culture, which formed a big part of my CV as well. So I had loads of questions that I had to answer above and beyond, my academic background and my professional interests and my first degree in marketing and so on, because these are individuals who understand what it takes to have a well-rounded individual being a champion for a particular scholarship.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that information, because that's very important for all the aspiring students who are ready to avail that scholarships. So, Lakshmi, based on your experience, what do you think universities should play in creating more gender inclusive environment for students who are studying abroad?
Okay, that's a very thoughtful question, because universities, to my mind, are probably the last of the safe spaces that exist where you could still carry on having a dialogue, celebrating your differences. And I think all of us who are in the sector need to keep fighting to keep them as those spaces. Universities are also quite comfortable in terms of crafting policies to celebrate differences. Universities, it is in their DNA, right, to celebrate diversity and to celebrate inclusivity. So I think creating safe spaces for students to talk about gender issues, violence, if they have experienced that. I think universities do that fairly well and are also under a lot of self-regulation and scrutiny, so they keep improving upon that. Second thing is that mental health support in universities, primarily after the COVID pandemic, it is a much talked about issue, and universities offer a lot of mental health support, which, especially in gender related issues, you do need to kind of keep that in mind. Having policies in place, like I mentioned earlier, which would enable perpetrators and also victims to be brought into a safe space where things can be resolved. If not, if we need to raise a complaint, it offers the mechanism to help the victims to kind of come forward. And last but not the least, which is why I love this sector a lot, is that universities celebrate differences. And it is not about us versus them. It is about offering a place where different voices can be heard. And I am not afraid to come forward and speak as to who I am. What if a student has got certain gender related issues, there is a safe place for them to voice that, and they will not then feel excluded. Worldwide, I think there is a lot of work that is going on around gender, gender fluidity, which is no longer just male and female, and being able to celebrate that. You see exemplars within the university space. There is still work to be done, of course, but then universities sort of become the cradles of those kinds of practices, which then you take into the society.
Talking about gender based biases, did you ever face one of those in your profession? If yes, how did you overcome that?
I think most women face gender biases at some stage in their professional careers. I have never wanted to think of myself as a victim in most things in my life, whether personal or professional. I have always tried to kind of, do things to fix those and just move forward. But I think one area where I have actually felt that I am looked upon quite differently is the fact that I am a married professional without children. So I've come across tendencies amongst senior male colleagues to think that I do not have the same kinds of pressures that working mothers and working fathers do. Um, Having said that, I have actually taken that sense that I have felt and made something about it, in the sense that I have been very mindful of being extremely supportive of women colleagues that I have had in my previous role and elsewhere, who have child rearing responsibilities, and ensuring that I have offered them work environment where they felt that they could continue to contribute. I have myself put in place measures to bring back mothers who have moved out of a professional career and taken a career break for about 2 to 3 years or even beyond, trying to bring them back into the fold, offering them, working hours where, in jobs, in areas where they could continue to contribute. It can't kind of, happen in every um, role. There are certain roles where we can offer flexibility, and I have kind of, managed to do that. But, the fact of the matter is that, both men and women will face biases. Yeah. Women face biases around their because they're considered as a more vulnerable gender. So then there are certain jobs that you can't do, there are certain roles that you can't perform because you don't have the physical strength, or you have child rearing responsibilities which have been passed on to you. That means that you're out of the career track for a while. But having said that, I think all women have a responsibility to make it better for other women colleagues. That is what I believe. You have to open the door for another colleague to be able to to allow her to pass through, so that she will do that for someone else coming from behind her. That is what I sincerely believe in.
That's indeed a great support to all the women colleagues you have had in your tenure. So, considering the entire tenure of your professional journey, do you think the role of women leaders have changed in the last decade?
Very good question, Sandhya. Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in the sense that us women leaders are now allowed to be more vulnerable. So take the case of Jacinda Ardern, who has stepped away from the Prime Ministership of New Zealand, saying that she's burnt out and she needs to take time out. At some, probably a decade ago, that would have been frowned upon, and we would have put it down to her not being strong enough, right? But now, vulnerability, it is okay to be vulnerable, and people accept that it is part of who we are as human beings, right? And I think COVID pandemic also has got a lot to do with it, about us being able to accept vulnerability in another. So that is one. Number two, I think women are more visible as leaders, both in the corporate world and also in politics. I don't know if you saw, 7 out of the 13 universities in Ireland now have a woman president, which is amazing. And so that means over 50% of the presidentships are being held by women, something to be truly celebrated. Last decade, I think, also saw the Me Too movement, which saw women and men who support women being very vocal about it is not okay to prey upon women. And we have seen powerful men being made to face their moment of reckoning as a result of that movement. So that I also think is a big change that has happened in the last decade with respect to women leadership. And especially in the tech world. Yeah, tech world has just lost a generation of women leaders who talk to us about leaning in and others. And they will have to kind of build now from bottom up, because women and young girls need role models. And it's a very important aspect of fostering leadership in the future generations. And we cannot take the eye off the ball. And the reason why that is because we form more than 50% of the world's human population. So we need to have a voice at the top table, wherever that is, whether it is in politics, in education, in the tech world, as the case may be.
Taking from what you just mentioned about the tech world, even though we live in a fast-paced digital era, there continues to be a gender gap in STEM fields. How can we provide early access to STEM education and encourage more women to pursue career in STEM field, both in India and, of course, abroad?
This is a worldwide issue. Young girls steering away from STEM subjects. The first point of tackling an issue is to acknowledge that an issue exists. So we all acknowledge that in the STEM world could kind of use more women. Exposing young girls to STEM subjects is the starting point, whether it is getting them to attend Olympiads of math and science and robotics, the traditional kind of strongholds of young boys, right? There are countries where right at the start, as babies take their first steps in socialization, they are young girls are being given trains to play with rather than just dolls, which is one way to kind of try and influence the wiring of their brains. But jokes apart, I do think that role models are hugely important, right? We see in India where at one point in time, individual sports, other than obviously cricket, wasn't considered hugely incentivizing for future-proofing your career. One Sania Mirza or one Saina Nehwal or one Koneru Hampi, for that matter, just blazed trails, whether it is in badminton or tennis or in chess, and proved to the world, and their parents actually proved to other parents that little girls could really kind of change how other little girls played certain sports and could actually get onto the podium at an Olympics and make the country proud. And that has actually triggered a wave of young girls going into these individual sports. Likewise, in STEM subjects, when we have women scientists being lauded and celebrated for sending a probe to Mars, I think that is a starting point. And parents have to kind of set aside some of the traditional stereotypes that they have in terms of what a girl should be doing or should not be doing. And I think there is a generation of parents now in India who see all sorts of dreams and possibilities for their young girl children. We will see some difference. We are, after all, a land of 1.3 billion. And I can see a generation of Indian women tech leaders emerging. There are green shoots already there. But role models are the starting point, I would say.
So, Lakshmi, talking about the role models, who are your role models and who inspires you the most?
I know it will sound as a bit of a cliche,
Okay.
but my biggest role model is my mother. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a very sheltered, conservative household. But from the time I could remember, my mother was a working woman. She balanced an academic career along with being part of a patriarchal household. And it was a non-negotiable in our house, academics. Come what may, you had to study and you had to, kind of stand up on your 2 feet. And my grandfather always used to say, "Oh, you should become a bank officer." But I sometimes wonder what he would think of me. I didn't become a bank officer, but for him, it was always about women having some career, a safe career. So much as I grew up in a patriarchal household, I had a role model in my mother who balanced household chores with and held down an academic career and retired as the head of the department of a leading college in Trivandrum. My second, and she continues to actually inspire me because she doesn't give up. She is now, almost 75 and has a spate of health challenges, but she doesn't give in to those. So she gets up every day and gives all of us a bit of a competition, walking 5 to 7 kilometers every single day. But my second role model is a biology teacher of mine who's no more. She actually passed on almost 15 years ago. She saw a lot of potential in me as a 15-year-old that I didn't know, I had. She saw big dreams for me that I wasn't even kind of aware that I could dream that big. And I do think that all of us need people who will dream big dreams for us and will also tell us that we are capable of, more than what we think we can do. And it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So 2 women, a teacher and my mother.
Wow, it's really heartening to know that. What advice would you like to give to the next generation of women leaders?
Right. It's a big question, but I will try and answer that by keeping it quite simple. I think it's very important to offer mentorship and sponsorship to other upcoming women colleagues and subordinates and peers, primarily because we have a duty of care to open the doors for other people to come forward. Mentoring other colleagues or other leaders is a very important aspect of you taking the mantle of a woman leader very seriously. It's okay to be vulnerable and it is okay to ask for help. I've had a very interesting situation where in front of very senior colleagues, men and women, I've had a breakdown. And I was told at that time that, I squandered away my power by showing a group of people that I was hugely vulnerable. But I've always reflected on that because I had reached a breaking point, and the only sort of outlet I had was just tears flowing. It happens to the best of us, and it is okay to be vulnerable because you are human. And leadership roles are very lonely. You won't have friends, and you have to take certain decisions. Some might be good decisions, some might be bad decisions, but at that point in time, whatever information you have, based on that, you take certain decisions and you have to own those decisions, right? It's very important. The third point I would like to make is that it's very important to build allies for yourself in the system, cutting across genders, cutting across levels. Your team should know who you are as a leader. You can't kind of keep yourself shut from the rest of the organization and expect that things will go as planned. You have to give a patient ear to someone who really wants to convey something to you. There are things that you might be able to act upon, there are things that you cannot, but at least they should know that their viewpoints are valued and you are giving them a patient hearing. Fourth one is that most of us women have imposter syndrome. We wonder whether we should be in this role even. Do we deserve to be this? I think the minute you acknowledge that you have an imposter syndrome, then you can start to tackle the imposter syndrome. And the only way to tackle that is by building on your skills, your knowledge base, knowing what is happening in your sector. I think that constant paranoia is quite good because it will keep you sharp and it will keep you at the cutting edge of what is going on in your space. Last but not the least, for any leader for that matter, this is not just for a woman leader per se, I think inclusivity, celebrating diversity, and also being a fair leader. These are the cornerstones of really being able to take a team forward together. So those are my 5 things that I would say that anyone who is aspiring to be a champion of women in leadership roles, they should keep these things in mind. Thank you, Sandhya. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers to women empowerment.